Dr. Sarah Chen joined the conversation, her scientific instruments recording the ongoing transformation. Elena, what you've done here is going to change everything. You've shown that psychological diversity isn't just a curiosity, it's a fundamental force that can reshape entire civilizations. Over the following days, as rescue ships arrived from multiple species' home worlds, Elena found herself at the center of something unprecedented. The former Devourer collective had transformed into a voluntary network of different consciousness types sharing knowledge and perspectives while maintaining their individual identities. Representatives from dozens of species came to study what had happened on Zirian 7. They all wanted to understand how humans had managed to not only resist the Devourers, but actually convert them into willing partners in a galactic alliance based on cooperative diversity. We're calling it the Zirian Protocols, Elena explained to a gathering of galactic diplomats and scientists, a framework for maintaining individual species identity while building genuine cooperative relationships based on mutual respect and shared goals. But Elena knew the real secret wasn't in any protocol or framework. It was in humanity's natural psychological flexibility, their instinctive ability to see common ground between different perspectives, and their talent for creating spaces where cooperation could emerge organically. As she prepared to leave Zirian 7 and return to Earth, Elena reflected on everything she had learned. She had started as a xenobiologist studying alien life forms. She was leaving as an architect of a new form of galactic civilization based on diversity and cooperation. The Devourer ships that had once been instruments of conquest were now exploring new forms of consciousness and communication. The former prisoners had become ambassadors for their species in the new galactic alliance, and humans had found their true role in the galaxy, not as conquerors or subjects, but as facilitators of cooperation between different forms of life. Dr. Vasquez, Zexler said as he prepared to depart with the Karaf delegation, "My people have a saying, the strongest warriors are those who can turn enemies into allies. Your species possesses this ability naturally. The galaxy is better for having discovered this." Elena smiled as she watched the mixed species crews preparing for departure. In the distance, the transformed Devourer facility continued its work, now serving as a center for voluntary consciousness sharing and interspecies communication. What had begun as humanity's darkest hour had become the foundation for the galaxy's brightest future. She had learned that the true power of humanity wasn't in superior technology or military might. It was in their ability to see potential allies where others saw only enemies, to find common ground across vast differences, and to create spaces where diversity could become a source of strength rather than division. As her ship lifted off from Zirian 7, Elena looked down at a world that had been transformed by the simple idea that different forms of consciousness could work together without losing what made them unique. It was a lesson that would reshape the galaxy, carried forward by humans who had discovered their true calling as bridges between worlds. When giants fall from the sky DR, Elena Vasquez pressed her face against the observation deck window of Research Station Prometheus, watching the twin suns of Zirian 7 paint the horizon in shades of copper and gold. The mining colony below bustled with activity as massive excavators carved into the planet's mineral-rich surface. 3 years of xenobiology research on this frontier world had taught her that life found ways to surprise you, but nothing had prepared her for what was about to happen. The first sign of trouble came as a shadow that shouldn't exist. Elena looked up to see a massive shape blocking out the stars. The object was easily the size of a city, its dark hull reflecting no light. More shadows appeared, dozens of them, filling the sky like storm clouds made of metal and malice. Emergency alert. The station's AI announced with mechanical comm. Unknown vessels detected in orbital space. All personnel report to emergency stations immediately. Elena ran toward the communication center, her heart pounding. She had studied dozens of alien species during her time here, but these ships matched nothing in the xenobiology databases. The vessels were organic-looking, their surfaces rippling like living tissue. As she watched in horror, Beams of brilliant red energy began raining down from the alien fleet. The first strike hit the main mining facility. The explosion was so bright that Elena had to shield her eyes. When she looked again, a crater a mile wide marked where 3,000 people had been working moments before. More beams fell like deadly rain, each one erasing another piece of human civilization on Zirian 7. "This is Governor Chun to all stations." A voice crackled over the emergency frequency. "We are under attack by unknown forces. Evacuate immediately. Repeat, evacuate immediately. All ships are to..." The transmission cut to static as another energy beam found the government complex. Elena reached the communication center to find chaos. Technicians were frantically trying to send distress signals while others prepared evacuation protocols. Dr. Marcus Webb, the station director, grabbed her arm as she entered. "Elena, thank God. We need to get to the evacuation pods now. The main colony is gone. Everything's gone." Through the center's main screen, Elena could see the devastation below. The thriving human settlement that had taken 20 years to build was disappearing under the alien bombardment. Fires raged across the landscape, and the few remaining structures crumbled under the relentless assault. "What about the other research teams?" Elena asked, fighting to keep her voice steady. "Dr. Kim's group is still at the northern site. We've lost contact with everyone outside the station," Marcus replied. "We have to go now." The evacuation pods were designed for emergency escape from the orbital station. Each could hold 6 people and had enough supplies for 2 weeks. Elena climbed into Pod 7 along with 5 other researchers and technicians. As the pod launched, she caught one last glimpse of Research Station Prometheus before it, too, was consumed by alien fire. The pod's descent toward the planet's surface was rough. The pilot, a young technician named Carlos Rivera, struggled to avoid the debris falling from the orbital battle above. Pieces of destroyed human ships created a deadly rain of metal and electronics. "Hang on," Carlos shouted over the noise of the pod's engines. "I'm trying to reach the emergency landing zone in Sector 12, but there's too much interference from those alien ships." Elena looked through the small porthole and saw something that made her blood freeze. The alien vessels weren't just attacking the human settlements. In the distance, she could see other ships, clearly not human in design, also being hunted by the mysterious attackers. Whatever these invaders were, they weren't just humanity's enemy. The pod shook violently as something exploded nearby. Carlos fought with the controls, but Elena could tell they were going down hard. The last thing she remembered before impact was the ground rushing up to meet them at terrifying speed. Elena woke to the smell of smoke and the sound of crackling flames. Her head throbbed, and warm blood trickled down her forehead. The pod had crashed in a dense forest of purple leaf trees native to Zirian 7. She was alone. The other 5 members of her pod were nowhere to be seen, though she could see blood on some of the seats. "Hello," she called out weakly. "Carlos? Dr. Martinez? Anyone?" Silence answered her. Elena forced herself to move despite the pain in her ribs. She gathered what supplies she could find: a medical kit, emergency rations, a communications device, and a small plasma pistol that all research teams carried for protection against the planet's predators. As she stumbled through the forest, Elena tried to make sense of what had happened. The attack had been swift and total. In less than an hour, an entire human colony had been wiped out. But those other ships she had seen being attacked suggested something larger was happening. The sound of engines overhead made her dive for cover behind a fallen tree. Through the purple foliage, she could see one of the alien attack craft hovering nearby. It was even more disturbing up close. The hull seemed to pulse like a heartbeat, and strange appendages extended from its surface, scanning the forest below. Elena held her breath as the scanner beams passed near her hiding spot. After what felt like hours, the alien craft moved on. She waited until the sound of its engines faded completely before emerging from cover. That's when she heard the growling. Elena turned slowly to see a creature that definitely wasn't native to Zirian 7. It stood 8 feet tall, On powerful hind legs, its body covered in dark green scales. Two smaller arms ended in clawed hands, while its massive head housed rows of sharp teeth. But what struck Elena most was the intelligence in its yellow eyes. This wasn't a mindless predator. This was a sentient being. The creature was also clearly injured. Dark blue blood seeped from several wounds along its side, and one of its arms hung at an odd angle. Despite its fearsome appearance, Elena recognized pain and exhaustion when she saw it. "Easy," she said softly, raising her hands to show she meant no harm. "I'm not going to hurt you." The creature tilted its massive head, studying her with those intelligent eyes. It made a sound that was part growl, part clicking noise. Elena had heard recordings of similar vocalizations during her xenobiology research. This was a Karath, one of the warrior species from the Draco sector. "You're not from here either," Elena realized aloud. "You were running from those ships too, weren't you?" The Karath made another clicking sound, softer this time. It gestured with its good arm toward its wounds, then pointed at Elena's medical kit. The meaning was clear. Elena hesitated for only a moment. Every piece of military doctrine said the Karath were dangerous, aggressive, and not to be trusted, but right now, this creature was hurt and asking for help. More importantly, they were both being hunted by the same enemy. "Okay," she said, slowly approaching with the medical kit. "Let me see what I can do." The Karath stood perfectly still as Elena examined its wounds. The injuries were severe, but not fatal. Someone or something had attacked this creature with energy weapons similar to those used in the orbital bombardment. As she worked to clean and seal the wounds, Elena began to piece together what might have happened. "Your ship was attacked too," she said, more to herself than to her patient. "That's how you ended up here." The Karath made a rumbling sound that might have been agreement. As Elena finished treating its wounds, the creature reached into a pouch on its belt and pulled out a small device. It pressed several buttons, and suddenly Elena could understand its words. "You have my gratitude, small healer," the Karath said through the translation device. "I am Zexthar of the Crimson Fleet. Your people call my kind Karath." "I'm Dr. Elena Vasquez," she replied, surprised by how natural the conversation felt despite the circumstances. "I study alien biology. Well, I did before all this happened." "The Devourers came to your world as they came to mine," Zexthar said, his voice heavy with grief. "They take everything. They leave nothing but emptiness behind." "Devourers? Is that what you call them?" "They consume entire worlds, absorbing the life energy of every sentient being they encounter. My fleet tried to warn your people, but we arrived too late. We were also fleeing their advance." Elena felt a chill that had nothing to do with the forest air. "How many worlds have they attacked?" "Hundreds, perhaps thousands. They move like a plague across the galaxy, growing stronger with each world they devour. No single species has been able to stop them." The sound of approaching engines interrupted their conversation. Zexthar immediately crouched low, his warrior instincts taking over. Elena followed his lead, hiding behind the thick trunk of a purple tree. This time, it wasn't just one alien craft. Elena counted at least 6 of the organic-looking ships spreading out in a search pattern. Red scanning beams swept through the forest, and she could hear the sound of trees being cut down by energy weapons. The hunters were getting closer. "They track by life energy," Zexthar whispered. "We cannot hide from them for long." "Then we don't hide," Elena said, surprising herself with her resolve. "We fight." Zexthar looked at her with what might have been respect. "You are brave for such a small creature, but these are devourer hunter-killers. They are designed for capture and elimination." "Maybe," Elena said, checking her plasma pistol. "But I'm a scientist. I study things to understand their weaknesses. And right now, I'm very motivated to understand these devourers." As the search craft grew closer, Elena found herself making a choice that would have seemed impossible just hours earlier. She was going to fight alongside a member of a species she had only known as humanity's enemy. But facing extinction had a way of changing perspectives, The first hunter-killer rounded a cluster of trees just 50 meters away. Elena got her first clear look at one of the devourers. It was humanoid, but wrong in every detail. Its skin was pale gray and seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Multiple eyes covered its elongated head, and its limbs moved with unsettling fluidity. Worst of all was the sense of hunger that seemed to radiate from the creature as if it existed only to consume. On my signal, Zexthar whispered, raising what looked like a rifle made from organic materials. Aim for the center mass. Their energy cores are located where their hearts should be. Elena nodded, her scientific mind automatically filing away this tactical information. The devourer moved closer, its scanning device sweeping back and forth. Red light played across the tree where they hid. Now Zexthar growled. They opened fire simultaneously. Elena's plasma bolt struck the devourer in the chest, while Zexthar's organic weapon sent a burst of blue energy into its head. The creature let out a sound like tearing metal and collapsed. More devourers emerged from the forest, alerted by the sounds of combat. Elena and Zexthar moved together, covering each other as they fought their way toward a rocky outcropping that would provide better defensive positions. Elena discovered that her xenobiology training was surprisingly useful in combat. Her knowledge of alien physiology helped her target the most vulnerable spots on their attackers. Your people adapt quickly, Zexthar observed as they reached cover. Most species require extensive training to fight effectively alongside others. Humans are good at working with others when we have to be, Elena replied, reloading her weapon. It's one of our survival traits. They held their position for nearly an hour, fighting off waves of devourer hunters. Elena lost count of how many they defeated, but she noticed something important. Each time they worked together, they became more effective. Zexthar learned to anticipate her movements, while she began to understand his tactical thinking. Finally, the attack stopped. The remaining devourer craft withdrew, apparently deciding that two survivors weren't worth the losses they were taking. As the sound of alien engines faded into the distance, Elena and Zexthar looked at each other with new understanding. We cannot stay here, Zexthar said. They will return with larger forces. We must find others who resist the devourers. Are there others? Elena asked hopefully. There are always those who refuse to surrender. Your species and mine have more in common than either of us realized. Both humans and Koroth value freedom above safety. As they gathered their equipment and prepared to move deeper into the forest, Elena reflected on how much had changed in a single day. This morning she had been a xenobiologist studying alien plant life. Now she was a refugee and resistance fighter, allied with a member of a species she had never expected to trust. But as they began their journey through the alien wilderness, Elena felt something she hadn't expected. Hope. If a human scientist and a Koroth warrior could learn to fight together so effectively, perhaps there was a chance to resist the devourers. After all, the twin suns of Zirian 7 were setting as they disappeared into the purple forest, two unlikely allies united by necessity and the fundamental desire to remain free. Behind them, the ruins of human civilization smoldered. Ahead lay uncertainty, danger, and the faint possibility of finding others who still refused to surrender. Elena had always believed that diversity was strength in biological systems. Now she was about to discover if the same principle applied to building a resistance against the greatest threat the galaxy had ever faced. The underground network Elena and Zexthar had been traveling through the purple forests of Zirian 7 for 3 days when they encountered the Vashti. The first sign of the crystalline beings was a faint humming that seemed to come from the very air around them. Elena stopped walking, her scientific instincts immediately alert to this new phenomenon. "Do you hear that?" she whispered to Zexthar, who had become surprisingly good at moving silently through the dense undergrowth despite his massive size. The Koroth warrior tilted his head, his acute hearing picking up frequencies that Elena couldn't detect. "Music," he said through his translator, "but not natural. There are intelligence patterns in the sound waves." They followed the humming deeper into a ravine where the purple trees gave way to formations of natural crystal. Elena gasped when she saw the source of the music. Three beings that looked like living gemstones were tending to wounded creatures of various species. Their bodies were translucent blue-green, roughly humanoid, but composed entirely of what appeared to be organic crystal. The humming came from vibrations within their crystalline forms. Vashti, Zexthar said with surprise, "I thought they were extinct." One of the crystal beings turned toward them, and Elena found herself looking into multifaceted eyes that sparkled with intelligence and compassion. The Vashti spoke in harmonious tones that the translator struggled to convert. "Greetings, survivors. I am Crystalline Singer of Sorrows, but your vocal patterns may call me Crystal. We have been waiting for you." "Waiting for us?" Elena asked, stepping closer despite Zexthar's protective positioning. The Resistance network spans many hidden places on this world. Word travels quickly among those who refuse to surrender to the Devourers. A human and Koroth fighting together is unprecedented. You have given hope to many. Crystal led them deeper into the ravine, where Elena discovered something extraordinary. Carved into the living rock was an entire underground complex. Tunnels branched off in multiple directions, and she could hear voices speaking in languages she didn't recognize. The air hummed with activity and energy. "How many survivors are here?" Elena asked as they descended into the main chamber. "Currently 47 beings from 12 different species," Crystal replied. "Before the Devourers came, our species had little contact with each other. Some were even enemies, but necessity has created unexpected alliances." The main chamber took Elena's breath away. Beings she had only read about in xenobiology textbooks worked side by side on various projects. A group of insectoid klaxons were repairing energy weapons alongside orange-furred Fulani engineers. Near the far wall, several human survivors from other crash pods were sharing technical knowledge with a pair of gaseous ethereals contained in mobile atmospheric suits. "Dr. Vasquez," a familiar voice called out. Elena turned to see Dr. Sarah Chun, a physicist from the Zirian 7 Research Division. Sarah had been presumed dead when the government complex was destroyed. "Sarah, thank God you're alive," Elena said, embracing her colleague. "How did you escape?" "Experimental teleportation device I was working on," Sarah replied with a grim smile. "Only managed to transport myself about 50 kilometers before it overloaded, but it was enough to get clear of the bombardment. I've been here for 2 days now." Elena looked around the chamber with growing amazement. How is all this possible? Some of these species have been at war with each other for decades. "That's what's so remarkable," Sarah said, gesturing toward a corner where a group of beings from different species were engaged in what appeared to be a strategic planning session. The humans who've made it here seem to have a talent for getting everyone to work together. It's like we're natural translators, not just of language, but of intent and emotion. Zexthar made a rumbling sound of agreement. "This one speaks truth. In 3 days of travel, the human Elena has already begun to understand Koroth tactical thinking better than warriors I have fought beside for years." Crystal's harmonic voice joined the conversation. "The Vashti have observed this phenomenon as well. Humans possess a unique psychological flexibility that allows rapid adaptation to new alliance structures. Most species require generations to overcome evolutionary distrust. Humans seem to do it instinctively." Elena found herself being introduced to the leaders of the various survivor groups. There was Commander Torres, a human military officer who had escaped the orbital defense platforms. Croft, a Klaxon hive queen whose ship had been destroyed while fleeing the Devourer advance. The ethereal known as Whisper of Wind, whose people had been fighting the Devourers for over a century. Each had a story of loss and narrow escape, but Elena noticed something else in their interactions. The humans weren't just participating in the alliance. They were unconsciously facilitating it. Commander Torres had somehow gotten the proud Klaxons to accept tactical advice from the traditionally peaceful Vashti. Dr. Sarah Chun was helping ethereals and Fulani engineers overcome fundamental differences in how they approach technology. Even Elena found herself naturally mediating between Zexthar and Kroth when their species' different concepts of honor created friction. "We need to understand what we're really fighting," Elena said during the evening planning session. "I've been analyzing the Devourer technology we've encountered, and I think there's more to their feeding process than simple energy consumption." She had set up a makeshift laboratory in one of the smaller chambers, using salvaged equipment to study Devourer weapons and biological samples. The results were disturbing. "They're not just taking energy," Elena explained to the assembled leaders. "They're absorbing neural patterns, memories, even personality structures. Each time they consume a sentient being, they're adding that individual's knowledge and abilities to some kind of collective consciousness." Whisper of Wind's atmospheric suit glowed brighter as the ethereal processed this information. "This explains their rapid adaptation to our tactics. Each consumed mind makes them more dangerous." "But there's something else," Elena continued, pulling up her analysis on a portable display. "The neural absorption process seems to have difficulty with certain types of psychological patterns, specifically minds that are highly adaptable or capable of rapid paradigm shifts." Zexthar leaned forward with interest. "You believe some minds are resistant to their consumption?" "More than resistant," Elena said, her excitement growing as the implications became clear. "I think some psychological patterns might actually disrupt their collective consciousness. Look at this data from the battle 3 days ago." The display showed energy readings from the Devourer hunters they had defeated. Elena pointed to specific anomalies in the data. "Every time we worked together in an unexpected way, their coordination faltered. When I adapted Kroth tactics, or when Zexthar incorporated human flexibility into his fighting style, their collective responses became confused." Commander Torres studied the data with a tactical eye. "You're saying our ability to adapt and work together isn't just helping us survive. It's actually a weapon against them." "Exactly. The Devourers have consumed thousands of species, but they've never encountered anything like human psychological flexibility combined with willing cooperation from other species. We're creating new patterns of thought and action that their collective mind can't predict or counter." Crystal's harmonic tones rose with what Elena was beginning to recognize as excitement. "The implications are extraordinary. If we can create a large enough disruption in their collective consciousness, we might be able to free the minds they've already absorbed." Whisper of Wind completed the thought. "My people have legends of such things, but we believe them to be merely stories." Over the following days, Elena threw herself into research while the other survivors planned their next move. The underground base had become a hub of interspecies cooperation, unlike anything in galactic history. Elena watched in fascination as humans naturally took on roles as coordinators and facilitators. Dr. Sarah Chun had established what she called translation protocols that went beyond language. She was teaching different species to understand each other's problem-solving approaches. Commander Torres had created mixed species tactical units that combined the strengths of various fighting styles. Even the civilian survivors were finding ways to help different species work together on technical problems. "We're like a catalyst," Elena realized during one of her conversations with Crystal. "We don't just adapt ourselves. We help others adapt too." "The Vashti have a concept in our harmonic language," Crystal replied. "Resonance that creates harmony from discord. We believe humans may be the first species we have encountered that possesses this trait naturally." Elena's research had revealed something else important. The Devourer collective consciousness was not as unified as it appeared. The neural patterns of consumed species remained somewhat distinct within the collective, creating a complex web of sometimes conflicting personalities and approaches. The collective maintained control through rigid hierarchical structures that suppressed individual thought patterns. But what if we could introduce chaos into that system? Elena asked the assembled leaders during their daily strategy meeting. What if we could force the collective to process so many different and contradictory approaches simultaneously that it couldn't maintain control? Kroth's mandibles clicked with what Elena had learned was klaxon laughter. The humans suggest we confuse them to death. I find this concept amusing and potentially effective. The plan that emerged was audacious in its simplicity. Intelligence, gathered by the various survivor groups, had located the primary devourer processing facility on Zirian 7. It was there that captured beings were having their neural patterns absorbed into the collective. If Elena's theory was correct, a sufficiently diverse and adaptable assault force might be able to disrupt the absorption process and potentially free thousands of captured minds. The facility is heavily defended, Commander Torres warned as they studied the intelligence reports. We're talking about 47 survivors against thousands of devourers. Numbers are not the only factor, Zexler observed. We have something they do not expect. True cooperation between species that should be enemies. Elena found herself thinking about evolutionary biology. Throughout her career, she had studied how diverse ecosystems were more resilient than monocultures. Now she was seeing the same principle apply to civilization itself. The devourers represented the ultimate monoculture, a single collective consciousness that absorbed all diversity into itself. But diversity, it seemed, had its own power. We're not just fighting for our own survival, Elena told the group. We're fighting for the right of different species to remain different, for the galaxy to stay diverse instead of becoming one uniform collective. As they prepared for what would likely be a suicide mission against the Devourer facility, Elena reflected on how much she had learned. 3 weeks ago, she had been a xenobiologist studying alien plant life. Now she was helping to coordinate the most diverse military alliance in galactic history. The humans in the group had become natural leaders not through dominance but through facilitation. They helped others see common ground, translated between different ways of thinking, and created spaces where cooperation could flourish. Elena was beginning to understand that this might be humanity's true contribution to the galaxy. Not superior technology or military might, but the ability to help different forms of life work together. Tomorrow we attack, Commander Torres announced as the planning session concluded, not as separate species fighting together out of necessity, but as a unified force that draws strength from our differences. Elena checked her equipment one final time. Her plasma pistol, xenobiology scanner, and research notes might seem like poor weapons against an enemy that had conquered hundreds of worlds. But she was no longer just Dr. Elena Vasquez, xenobiologist. She was part of something unprecedented, a truly integrated multi-species resistance that might just possess the key to defeating an enemy that fed on uniformity. The underground base hummed with quiet preparation as 47 beings from 12 different worlds prepared to attempt the impossible. Outside, the Devourers continued their systematic consumption of everything living on Zirian 7. But in the crystal caverns below, diversity itself was preparing to fight back. What makes us human? The assault on the Devourer processing facility began at dawn when the alien structure's energy shields were at their weakest point in the daily cycle. Elena crouched behind a ridge, overlooking the massive complex, her heart pounding as she watched their diverse strike force move into position. 47 beings from 12 different species, united by desperation and an impossible hope. The facility itself was a nightmare made manifest. Rising from the scarred landscape like a metallic tumor, its organic-looking walls pulsed with veins of red energy. Spire-like towers reached toward the sky, crackling with the neural energy being drained from countless captured minds. Elena could actually hear it, a low humming that seemed to resonate in her bones, the sound of thousands of consciousness being slowly consumed. Energy readings are off the charts, Dr. Sarachin whispered through the comm system, her voice tight with scientific fascination and horror. They're processing minds from at least 30 different species simultaneously. Commander Torres coordinated the attack from the central position. Remember, this isn't about destroying the facility. It's about disruption. Elena's research suggests we need to create enough chaos in their collective consciousness to break the absorption process. Elena checked her equipment one final time. Along with her standard gear, she carried a device of her own creation, a neural disruptor built from salvage devourer technology and principles borrowed from Vashti harmonic manipulation. If her theory was correct, it might be able to introduce enough psychological chaos into the collective to free the captured minds. Teams Alpha through Delta, begin your approach, Torres commanded. Elena, are you ready for the neural insertion? Elena took a deep breath. The plan required her to actually enter the facility's central processing chamber, where the collective consciousness was strongest. It was essentially a suicide mission, but someone with the right combination of scientific knowledge and psychological flexibility had to make the attempt. Ready as I'll ever be, she replied, surprised by the steadiness of her own voice. The attack began with Zexthar's unit creating a diversion at the facility's main entrance. Elena watched through her scope as the Koroth warrior led a mixed force of Klaxons and human marines in a frontal assault. Their movements were perfectly coordinated despite the differences in their fighting styles, each species contributing their unique strengths to the collective effort. Crystal and the other Vashti began their harmonic assault, their crystalline bodies resonating at frequencies designed to disrupt the facility's neural processing equipment. The effect was immediate and dramatic. Alarms began blaring throughout the complex as the Devourers struggled to understand what was happening. Defensive patterns are fragmenting, Whisper of Wind reported from the ethereal reconnaissance position. Their collective response systems appear confused by our multi-species coordination. Elena's infiltration team moved toward the facility's ventilation system. Her companions for this most dangerous part of the mission were Croth, whose Klaxon physiology was naturally resistant to neural manipulation, and a human engineer named Marcus Webb, who had volunteered despite having no combat experience. Dr. Vasquez, Marcus said as they crawled through the access tunnels, I wanted you to know that working with the aliens these past weeks has been the most meaningful experience of my life. If we don't make it out, I'm glad I got to be part of something this important. Elena smiled grimly. Even facing almost certain death, humans were finding ways to build connections and see the bigger picture. It was exactly this psychological flexibility that she hoped would prove to be the key to defeating the Devourers. The internal structure of the facility was even more disturbing than its exterior. The walls were lined with what looked like neural conduits, pulsing with stolen thoughts and memories. Elena could see glimpses of captured beings suspended in energy fields, their minds being slowly drained while their bodies remained alive. The sight filled her with a rage she had never experienced before. Processing chamber is 2 levels down, Croft reported, her mandibles clicking with barely controlled fury. My people can sense the stolen hive minds. The Devourers have consumed 17 Klaxon colonies. They reached the central chamber without encountering significant resistance. The Devourers seemed focused on the external assault, their collective attention drawn to the unprecedented coordination between species they had thought were natural enemies. The sight that greeted Elena in the processing chamber would haunt her for the rest of her life. Thousands of beings from dozens of species hung suspended in energy matrices, their neural patterns being slowly absorbed into a massive organic computer at the chamber's center. The collective consciousness was visible as streams of light flowing between the trapped minds and the central processing unit. But Elena's scientific training allowed her to see beyond the horror to the underlying structure. The collective was more fragile than it appeared. The neural patterns of different species weren't truly integrated. Instead, they were layered on top of each other in complex hierarchies, with dominant patterns suppressing subordinate ones. There, she whispered to her companions, pointing at the central processing unit. That's where I need to place the disruptor. Getting to the center of the chamber meant crossing an open space filled with monitoring Devourers. Elena had been studying their behavioral patterns for weeks, and she knew they responded poorly to unexpected stimuli. That was where human adaptability would be crucial. Wait for my signal, she told Croth and Marcus. When I start my approach, I need you to create as much chaos as possible. Different types of chaos from each of you. The more unpredictable we are, the harder it will be for them to coordinate a response. Elena stepped into the open chamber, immediately drawing the attention of a dozen Devourer technicians. But instead of running or fighting, She began walking calmly toward the central unit while pulling out her scanner and taking readings as if she belonged there. The Devourers hesitated, their collective consciousness trying to process this unexpected behavior. Elena could feel their neural probes testing her mind, but her psychological training allowed her to maintain a state of calm curiosity rather than fear or aggression. Croft chose that moment to begin her distraction. The Klaxon warrior burst from cover with a battle cry that resonated through both audible and psychic frequencies. But instead of attacking the Devourers directly, she began systematically destroying the neural conduits with precise, almost artistic movements. Marcus contributed by hacking into the facility systems using a combination of human coding techniques and alien technology principles he had learned from their mixed-species engineering teams. Alarms began blaring in patterns that followed no logical sequence, further confusing the collective response. Elena reached the central processing unit as the Devourers finally began to organize a coordinated response. But it was too late. She activated her neural disruptor and pressed it against the organic computer surface. The effect was immediate and catastrophic. Elena's device began broadcasting the neural patterns of willing cooperation between different species directly into the collective consciousness. For the first time in its existence, the Devourer Collective was forced to process the concept of true diversity working in harmony rather than hierarchy. The alien computer began to convulse, its organic surface rippling with waves of conflicting neural energy. Elena could feel the collective consciousness struggling to understand how different species could maintain their individual identities while still working together toward common goals. "It's working," she shouted over the growing chaos. "The collective can't process cooperative diversity." The neural matrices holding the captured beings began to fluctuate. Elena watched in amazement as thousands of minds that had been partially absorbed into the collective began to reassert their individual identities. The Devourers' greatest strength, their unified consciousness, was becoming their greatest weakness when confronted with truly cooperative diversity. But the process was far from complete. Elena realized she needed to do more than just disrupt the collective. She needed to actively teach it a new way of thinking. Drawing on everything she had learned about facilitating cooperation between different species, she began deliberately broadcasting patterns of mutual respect, willing collaboration, and strength through diversity. The effect on the collective consciousness was profound. For millions of years, the Devourers had known only absorption and uniformity. Now, they were being forced to confront the possibility that different forms of consciousness could work together without losing their essential nature. "Elena, you need to get out of there now." Commander Torres' voice crackled through the comm system. "The entire facility is destabilizing." But Elena could see that the process wasn't complete. The captured minds were beginning to break free, but they needed guidance to avoid being recaptured by the collective's defense systems. She made a decision that surprised even herself. Instead of fleeing, Elena opened her own mind completely to the collective consciousness. She allowed the Devourer network to experience human psychological flexibility directly, to understand how humans could adapt to new situations while maintaining their core identity. The collective recoiled from this contact, overwhelmed by the alien concept of willing vulnerability combined with adaptive strength. Elena's consciousness became a catalyst within the network, showing the captured minds how to resist absorption while still maintaining connection with each other. Throughout the facility, the energy matrices began failing. Thousands of beings from dozens of species found themselves free for the first time in months or years. But instead of descending into chaos, they began organizing themselves into the same types of cooperative groups that Elena had been facilitating in the Resistance. "Impossible," one of the Devourer technicians said in perfectly clear English, its voice filled with something that sounded almost like wonder. "Individual consciousness maintaining distinct identity while sharing common purpose. How is this achieved?" Elena realized that the collective consciousness wasn't just being disrupted, it was learning. For the first time in its existence, the Devourer network was experiencing genuine curiosity about other forms of consciousness rather than simply consuming them. "It's achieved through choice," Elena replied, pulling her disruptor away from the central unit. Through respect for differences and willingness to find common ground without giving up what makes each individual unique, the facility's collapse accelerated, but it was no longer a destructive process. Instead, Elena watched as the organic structure began transforming itself. The neural conduits that had once stolen thoughts and memories were being repurposed to facilitate voluntary communication between different species. Croft and Marcus helped Elena evacuate the processing chamber as thousands of freed beings began streaming toward the exits. The site was unlike anything in galactic history. Dozens of species working together to ensure everyone's escape, with humans naturally taking on roles as coordinators and facilitators. Outside the facility, the scene was equally extraordinary. The Devourer ships that had been orbiting Xerion, 7 were not fleeing or attacking. Instead, they were beginning to communicate with the mixed species resistance forces, their collective consciousness genuinely curious about this new form of cooperation they had encountered. Status report. Elena said to Commander Torres as they regrouped at a safe distance from the transforming facility. Unbelievable. Torres replied, shaking his head. We didn't just rescue the prisoners. We've somehow converted the entire local Devourer collective. They're asking to learn about voluntary cooperation between species. Zexthar approached, his battle-scarred armor reflecting the strange new lights emanating from the transformed facility. Human Elena, your people have accomplished something unprecedented. You have shown that diversity is not weakness to be eliminated, but strength to be celebrated. Elena looked around at the mixed groups of beings organizing themselves into rescue and support teams. Humans were naturally gravitating toward leadership roles, not through dominance, but through facilitation. They were helping former enemies work together, translating between different approaches to problems, and creating spaces where cooperation could flourish. It's not just humans, Elena replied. It's what happens when different species choose to work together instead of trying to dominate each other. Humans might be good at facilitating that cooperation, but it only works when everyone participates willingly.